You know, we've all seen those moments, right? Like in the grocery store, a kid's having a total meltdown, and it's easy to just jump to, oh, that kid's spoiled or bad parenting.
Right. It's easy to make those snap judgments.
Exactly. But when you guys asked for a deep dive on ADHD and autism meltdowns,
Mm.
well, it hit me that maybe I don't have it all figured out either. So we're digging into the article ADHD meltdown, V's autism meltdown to like really unpack this.
And it's a good one because right off the bat, that article makes something super clear. A meltdown, whether it's ADHD or autism related, is not a choice. It's not kids being manipulative.
It's like I said, it's involuntary. Like their system's overloaded.
Exactly. Like a computer that just completely freezes because it's trying to run too many programs.
Oh, see, and that's a good analogy for me because when my brain's overloaded, it's not pretty either. But I guess the point is, just like a computer crashing, there's a reason why it's happening.
And understanding that why is huge, which leads us to triggers. This is where the differences between ADHD and autism really come into play.
Right. And this is where I was like, whoa, things just got real. Because I knew sensory stuff was important, but when the article got into specifics, even I was surprised.
Yeah, it's easy to lump it all together, right? Sensory overload is sensory overload. But the article made it clear the triggers are often totally different.
So walk me through it. Where do these meltdowns actually come from?
Okay, so with ADHD, a lot of times it boils down to emotional regulation. Think like interruptions when someone's super focused.
Yeah, that's a recipe for disaster with my ADHD brain. I can't even.
Exactly. Or unexpected changes to routines, having to wait ages for something. Things that throw off their internal sense of order.
So it's not so much that, like, the lights are too bright or whatever. It's more like their emotions just spiral because something messed with their groove.
Exactly. Whereas with autism, that's often where the sensory input itself becomes a primary trigger. Things like bright lights, certain noises.
Yeah.
The article even mentioned clothing tags, which I thought was super interesting.
Okay, see, that was a light bulb moment for me. Like, I'd never considered a clothing tag as being that intense. Really makes you think about how different our sensory experiences can be.
Right, and it highlights why understanding sensory processing in both conditions is so important, even if it plays out differently.
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit. The article talked about sensory processing in both ADHD and autism, but in different ways. What's the distinction? So, sensory processing, it's in the mix for both ADHD and autism, but plays out differently. How so?
Okay, picture this. You're in a packed coffee shop. Music, the espresso machine, people chatting.
Oh, the sensory symphony of caffeine and conversation. I get it.
Right. Now, for someone with ADHD, it's like all those sounds are competing for attention at the same time. Their brain's trying to process it all, and it creates this feeling of sensory overload.
So it's not that any one sound is too much. It's the sheer volume, everything vying for space in their brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But now, imagine that same coffee shop, but for someone with autism. Maybe they're fine with the general buzz, but then the espresso machine's high-pitched whir. That becomes intensely overwhelming.
So it's like that clothing tag example. It's not the volume of sensations, but the intensity of a specific one.
Exactly. And that's why this matters. It's not just, oh, they're overstimulated, it's why. What sensory experience is tipping the scales? Because a tantrum and a meltdown, easy to mix those up from the outside, but the article made it clear. We got to know the difference.
Because it changes how we react, right? But how do we even tell?
It's about recognizing a meltdown, ADHD or autism, isn't a choice. It's their brain going overload. A tantrum, though, that's behavioral. They want something or don't want something.
So, like the article said, a tantrum might be, I don't want to leave the playground, screaming, crying. But a meltdown, that could be the playground's just too much. Noise, chaos, same behavior, totally different reason.
And that's where empathy's huge. Punishing a meltdown is like punishing someone for having a migraine. It's not going to help. Which is why I love that the article dove into coping strategies.
Yes. Because we've talked about identifying the difference, but what do we do for kids and honestly for anyone who experiences these?
Big takeaway. Proactive support. Don't wait for the meltdown. Build in things that prevent it.
So, like, create an environment where meltdowns are less likely to happen in the first place. What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Routine. Huge for both ADHD and autism. Predictability equals less anxiety.
Routines for the win. And I bet visual aids play into that too, right?
Big time. The article talked about timers, calendars, visual learners. That stuff's grounding.
I'm visual, and even I love a good timer. Makes things so much clearer.
Right. Takes the pressure off holding it all in your head, which is tough with ADHD or autism. And then sensory breaks. Essential. If you know your kid's easily overwhelmed, Build in those pauses.
So they can like reset, re-regulate.
Exactly. Deep breaths, a quiet space. Doesn't have to be complex, just effective.
The article also talked about validating emotions during a meltdown, like not just trying to stop the behavior, but acknowledging how they feel.
Huge. Remember, not a choice. Not being naughty. So validating isn't giving in. It's saying, I see you. This is hard.
Which, even for an adult, when you're overwhelmed, that can be so powerful.
Exactly. You're not alone. You're understood. And that makes me think it's not just kids, right? We all have sensory limits, emotional triggers.
Oh, totally. I've hit that wall where I'm like, one more thing and I'm going to...
Exactly. So recognizing those moments in ourselves, that's huge for self-care.
Knowing when we need a break, some understanding. But what about when it's more than that? The article mentioned getting professional help.
And it's worth repeating. There's this stigma, but sometimes you need extra support.
Like you wouldn't just hope the flu goes away if it's bad. You'd see a doctor.
Exactly. If it's impacting life too much, family stressed, get help.
That professional validation, it can be such a relief. Okay, before we go down too many rabbit holes, what's your biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Understand the why behind the behavior. Don't just slap a label on it. When we get what's driving it, ADHD, autism, whatever, that's when we can respond with empathy, not judgment.
Seriously, this whole understand the why thing, it's making me think about, like, even when it's not a full-blown meltdown, but those times I just hit a wall, you know?
Oh, absolutely. We think of meltdowns as a kid thing, but honestly, those same sensory or emotional triggers, they get us all sometimes.
Right. Like, I know if I've had back-to-back meetings all day, then traffic, I'm done. Need that quiet time, just like we were saying about sensory breaks.
And that's the thing, right? Knowing how this stuff shows up in kids, in ourselves, that's what gives us the power to be like, okay, this is what I need.
Totally. Advocate for your own needs. So somebody's listening thinking, this is me. What do I do? What's step one?
Pay attention. What are your triggers? When do you feel that overwhelm creeping in? What helps you calm down? And same for if you're helping a child. Observe. Try to spot the triggers. Experiment with different strategies.
Because it's not one size fits all, right? Like the article said, even within ADHD, within autism, everybody's different.
Exactly. And that's where that professional support can be so key. A therapist can help tailor strategies, for you, for your child, and just be that guide.
Support system, for sure. This has been so eye-opening, even for me. So, to wrap up this deep dive, let's hit those key takeaways one last time.
Let's do it.
First off, meltdowns, not tantrums. Neurological, not manipulative. And the triggers, often very different for ADHD versus autism.
Right. ADHD, more about that emotional dysregulation, autism, sensory processing differences, although both play a role.
And understanding that difference is everything for responding in a way that actually helps.
For sure.
We talked about routines, sensory breaks, validating those big feelings, all those strategies to have in your back pocket.
And that sometimes getting professional help, that's not failing. It's getting the support you deserve.
100%. If you take away just one thing from this deep dive, let it be empathy. For yourself, for your kids, for everyone. Because we're all just figuring this stuff out as we go.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Remember, the more we learn, the better equipped we are to support ourselves and each other. Until next time, happy learning.